Hey, welcome back. And if you are brand new here, welcome for the very first time. You picked a good day to show up. This channel exists for one reason, to tell you stories that remind you who you are, inspire your heart, and add more values to you. And that is why I recommend that you watch to the end. I want you to imagine a young man, talented, faithful, full of promise, betrayed by his own flesh and blood, shipped off to a strange city with nothing. Then just when he rebuilds everything from zero, a powerful woman lies about him and takes it all away again.
I want you to come home with me.
No,
Most people
absolutely
would have
not. I'm
broken.
leaving.
He didn't. And what God, what destiny, what the universe did with his patience, nobody in that story saw it coming. Not his brothers, not the woman who lied, not even him. This is The Favor on Him, a modern story inspired by one of the greatest comeback stories ever written. Stay with me because this one goes places. And real quick before we start, if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now. Tap that button, join this family. We tell stories here that will change how you see your own life and people. You do not want to miss what is coming next on this channel. All right, grab a drink and let's get into it. Everyone in the Carter family knew that their father loved all his sons. But everyone also knew, though nobody said it out loud at Sunday dinners, that he loved Jordan Carter differently. Robert Carter was a self-made man. He had built Carter Logistics from a single delivery truck and a prayer into a mid-sized freight company in Atlanta, Georgia, with 40 employees and contracts across the Southeast. He had 7 sons from 2 marriages, loud, competitive, restless young men who jostled for position the way boys do when their father is someone worth impressing. But Jordan was different. At 22, he was the youngest of the brothers, quiet where they were loud, thoughtful where they were impulsive. He had his father's eyes, sharp and watchful, and something else underneath them that Robert Carter recognized because he had seen it in the mirror 30 years ago. The boy was going somewhere. Robert didn't hide his pride well. He gave Jordan responsibilities at the company that his older brothers had waited years for. He took Jordan to meetings. He listened when Jordan spoke. He bought him a car for his birthday that 2 of the older brothers had been asking for since Christmas. And the brothers watched all of it with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. It happened on a Friday in October. The brothers had driven together to a client site 3 hours outside Atlanta, a routine delivery inspection. Jordan had come along at their father's request, notebook in hand, learning the operation the way Robert Carter wanted his successor to learn it. On the drive back, somewhere on a long, empty stretch of Georgia highway, the mood in the van shifted. It started with Marcus, the eldest, 31, who had been waiting to run Carter Logistics since he was 16 years old. "Pull over," he said quietly. The van stopped. What happened next lasted less than 10 minutes and changed Jordan Carter's life completely. They took his phone, they took his jacket, they left him on the side of the highway with nothing but the clothes on his back and a story they had already agreed on, that Jordan had gotten into an argument, walked off, and nobody knew where he was. Then Marcus made one more move. He called a contact, a recruiter he knew who placed workers with companies across the country, and arranged for Jordan to be picked up and placed as far from Atlanta as possible. Let him figure out his own greatness somewhere else, Marcus thought, far away from our father's house. 2 days later, Robert Carter filed a missing person report, his hands shaking, his eyes red. His sons stood around him and said nothing. Jordan Carter arrived in Chicago with nothing. No phone, no money, no contacts. A 22-year-old black man in a strange city, placed by a recruiter into an entry-level position at Harrison Capital Group, one of the most powerful private equity firms in the Midwest. He was hired as a general office assistant. He made coffee, he sorted mail, he cleaned conference rooms and ran errands, and did every single thing he was asked to do with the same quiet precision he had brought to everything his whole life. He did not complain. He did not explain his situation to anyone. He simply worked, and he paid attention to everything. Richard Harrison was the kind of man who noticed things other people missed. At 58, he had built Harrison Capital Group over 3 decades into a firm managing over $2 billion in assets. He was brilliant, demanding, and had developed over the years an almost supernatural ability to read people. He noticed Jordan within the first month. It wasn't any single thing. It was the accumulation of small things. The way Jordan organized the filing system nobody had touched in 4 years without being asked. The memo he left on Harrison's desk, quietly, with no fanfare, identifying a scheduling conflict that would have cost the firm a major client meeting. The way he treated the receptionist and the security guard with the same respect he showed senior partners. Harrison called him into his office on a Thursday morning. "Where did you study?" he asked. "I didn't finish my degree, sir," Jordan said evenly. "I had some personal circumstances." Harrison looked at him for a long moment. "What do you know about logistics and supply chain financing?" Jordan looked back at him steadily. "My father owns a logistics company in Atlanta. I grew up in that business. I know it better than I know most things." Harrison nodded slowly. "Come back Monday," he said. "You're not an office assistant anymore." What Jordan Carter did over the next 3 years at Harrison Capital Group was not magic. It was discipline. It was excellence. It was the quiet, daily, unrelenting commitment to doing everything right, not for applause, not for reward, but because that was simply who he was. He started as a junior analyst on the logistics portfolio. Within 8 months, he had identified 3 underperforming investments and restructured the analysis framework the team had been using for years. The portfolio gained 14%. Harrison moved him up. Within 2 years, Jordan was managing a team of analysts twice his age. Within 3 years, Richard Harrison had done something he had never done for any employee in 30 years of business. He gave Jordan Carter full operational authority over the firm's investment portfolio. Not a title, not a symbolic gesture, real authority, the kind where Harrison looked at his board and said, "Whatever Jordan decides, we execute." The office noticed. Some people were inspired, some were threatened. Most simply accepted the reality that was becoming impossible to ignore. There was something on this young man that could not be explained by resume or connections or luck. Whatever Jordan Carter touched seemed to prosper. Harrison felt it so profoundly that he stopped reviewing Jordan's decisions before implementation. He stopped auditing his numbers. He simply trusted him completely, the way you trust someone when the evidence has made doubt feel foolish. "I don't know what it is about you," Harrison told him once after a deal closed that everyone else had said was impossible, "but I know enough to stay out of its way." Jordan smiled quietly and said nothing. He thought about his father sometimes, about Atlanta, about a highway in October and the faces of his brothers. He filed it away and got back to work. Her name was Victoria Harrison. She was 44 years old, Richard Harrison's wife of 18 years, and she was, by any objective measure, a stunning woman. Polished, sophisticated, the kind of woman who walked into rooms and rearranged them simply by being present. She had a corner office at Harrison Capital because she sat on the board. She was intelligent, well-connected, and had her own professional accomplishments that had nothing to do with her husband's name. She was also deeply, profoundly unhappy. Richard Harrison worked 16 hours a day. He missed dinners, he missed anniversaries. He was present in the building and absent in the marriage. And Victoria had spent years filling the silence with shopping and travel and charity boards and the particular loneliness of a woman who has everything except the one thing she actually wants. She noticed Jordan Carter the way women notice men who carry themselves like they know exactly who they are. At first, it was professional. She consulted him on a board matter. He was sharp and respectful and looked her directly in the eye of the way people do when they are not intimidated and not interested in anything except the work. That directness, ironically, was what drew her in. She found reasons to be near him, meetings that didn't need to happen, questions she already knew the answers to, long conversations in the hallway that she initiated and he always redirected, gently, professionally, back to business. Jordan saw it clearly. He had seen it building for months, the way you watch a storm forming on a horizon. He was careful. He was respectful. He made sure he was never alone with her in a room longer than necessary. He kept every interaction documented. He was never rude, never cold, just quietly, consistently unavailable in the way she was looking for. He told himself every morning what he told himself about everything else. Do the right thing, even when nobody is watching, especially when nobody is watching. How are you finding the story? Hope interesting. Don't forget to subscribe and share if you haven't. It happened on a late Tuesday evening in November. The office was empty. Jordan had stayed late to finalize a report for a board meeting the next morning. He was at his desk, jacket off, deep in a spreadsheet, when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Victoria Harrison appeared at his office door. She was dressed differently than she dressed for the office. Hair down, a different kind of perfume. The intention was written in every detail so clearly that Jordan felt the air in the room change the moment she stepped through the door. She closed it behind her. "Working late again," she said softly. "Good evening, Mrs. Harrison." Jordan's voice was calm. He did not stand up. He did not lean back. He kept his posture neutral and his eyes steady. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, his voice low and steady and without a trace of cruelty. "I want to say this carefully because I respect you." A pause. "Your husband has given me everything. When I had nothing, no name in this city, no connections, no history anyone here could verify, he looked at my work and he trusted me, completely." Another pause. "I will not betray that, not for anything." Victoria stared at him. "What happens in this room stays in this room," she said softly. "Nothing is going to happen in this room," Jordan replied, simply, finally. The silence between them was enormous. Victoria Harrison's expression shifted through something complicated and painful and then hardened into something else entirely. She turned and walked out without another word. Jordan stood alone in his office for a long moment. Then he sat down, picked up his pen, and went back to the spreadsheet. He knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who has learned to read the weather, that the storm had not passed. It had only just begun. By Wednesday morning, the story was already moving through the firm like smoke. Victoria Harrison had gone to Richard's most trusted board member, a man named Gerald Cole, and told him that Jordan Carter had made an inappropriate advance toward her the previous evening, that he had made her feel unsafe, that she had only just found the courage to say something. Gerald Cole called an emergency meeting. Jordan walked into that conference room and found 6 people staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed satisfaction. He listened to the accusation in complete silence. When they finished, he said calmly, "That is not what happened." It didn't matter. Richard Harrison flew back from London that same day. He sat across from Jordan in his office, the same office where 3 years ago he had told a young man with nothing that he saw something in him, and this time his face was closed and pained and unreachable. "I need to put you on administrative leave," Richard said quietly, "while we investigate." Jordan looked at the man who had been the closest thing to a father he had known in 3 years. "I understand," he said. He picked up his jacket. He walked out of the building. He did not argue, did not beg, did not rage at the injustice of it. He simply walked, straight-backed, dignified, the way his real father had taught him a Carter man walks, into whatever was coming next. The administrative leave became a termination. The termination became a quiet blacklisting, the kind that happens in tight professional circles without anyone writing anything down. Suddenly, Jordan's calls weren't returned. His applications disappeared into silence. 3 months after leaving Harrison Capital, he was living in a studio apartment in Chicago, working at a FedEx distribution center, starting over from zero. Again. He thought about giving up exactly once, on a cold February night, sitting on the floor of his empty apartment eating takeout alone. His brilliant mind running calculations about how much further down a person could fall before there was nowhere left to go. He gave himself 1 hour to sit with it. Then he got up, opened his laptop, and started building. He spent his evenings writing, analysis, market research, investment frameworks. He built a financial blog that started getting attention in niche circles. He consulted informally for small businesses who couldn't afford real analysts. He worked at FedEx during the day and built his mind at night and refused, absolutely refused, to let bitterness take up residence inside him. Because he had seen what bitterness did to people. He had seen it in his brothers' faces on a highway in October. He would not become that.
It started with a phone call. A man named Dennis Holt, CFO of a mid-sized manufacturing company called Meridian Industries, had read 3 of Jordan's blog posts and tracked him down through a mutual contact. "I don't know where you've been," Dennis said on the phone, "but I know what I just read, and I need someone who thinks like that in a room with my board next Thursday." Jordan showed up. He walked into that boardroom the same way he had walked into every room his entire life, prepared, composed, and carrying something in his eyes that made people lean forward without knowing why. He spoke for 40 minutes. By the end, the board had stopped taking notes and were simply listening. The CEO of Meridian Industries, a man named Frank Caldwell, called him privately afterward. "Name your number," Frank said. Jordan named it. Frank didn't blink. 3 months later, Jordan Carter was Chief Investment Officer of Meridian Industries. Within a year, the firm's portfolio had grown by 31%. Within 2 years, Jordan was on the cover of a Chicago business magazine under the headline, "The Quiet Force: How Jordan Carter Became the Most Trusted Name in Midwest Finance." The article ran on a Wednesday. By Friday, Richard Harrison had read it 3 times. It was Victoria who broke first. Nobody expected it, least of all Richard. It came 18 months after Jordan's departure, on a quiet Sunday evening when the weight of what she had done had finally become heavier than the pride keeping it in place. She sat across from her husband in their living room and told him everything, every word. Richard Harrison did not speak for a very long time. When he finally did, his voice was different than Victoria had ever heard it. "You destroyed that boy's career," he said quietly, "over a rejection." Victoria had no answer for that. Richard picked up his phone. Jordan was in his office at Meridian when his assistant told him Richard Harrison was on the line. He sat with that information for a moment. Then he picked up. "Jordan," Richard's voice was rough, the voice of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. "I know what happened. Victoria told me everything." A long pause. "I owe you an apology that I don't have adequate words for." Jordan was quiet. "I believed her," Richard continued, "over you. After everything you showed me, everything you built in this firm, I believed her without giving you a real chance to defend yourself. And I have thought about that every single day since I saw your face on that magazine cover." His voice cracked slightly. "I am sorry, son." The word son hung in the air between them. Jordan looked out the window of his corner office, in his firm, in his city, and thought about a highway in Georgia, and a London flight, and a studio apartment in February, and every single day he had chosen to keep going when stopping would have been so much easier. "Mr. Harrison," he said finally, "I forgave you a long time ago." Silence on the other end. "You did?" Richard said. "I had to," Jordan said simply. "Carrying that would have cost me more than you ever could." A pause. Bitterness is expensive. I couldn't afford it. It started with a phone call. A man named Dennis Holt, CFO of a mid-sized manufacturing company called Meridian Industries, had read 3 of Jordan's blog posts and tracked him down through a mutual contact. "I don't know where you've been," Dennis said on the phone, "but I know what I just read, and I need someone who thinks like that in a room with my board next Thursday." Jordan showed up. He walked into that boardroom the same way he had walked into every room his entire life, prepared, composed, and carrying something in his eyes that made people lean forward without knowing why. He spoke for 40 minutes. By the end, the board had stopped taking notes and were simply listening. The CEO of Meridian Industries, a man named Frank Caldwell, called him privately afterward. "Name your number," Frank said. Jordan named it. Frank didn't blink. 3 months later, Jordan Carter was Chief Investment Officer of Meridian Industries. Within a year, the firm's portfolio had grown by 31%. Within 2 years, Jordan was on the cover of a Chicago business magazine under the headline, "The Quiet Force: How Jordan Carter Became the Most Trusted Name in Midwest Finance." The article ran on a Wednesday. By Friday, Richard Harrison had read it 3 times. It was Victoria who broke first. Nobody expected it, least of all Richard. It came 18 months after Jordan's departure, on a quiet Sunday evening when the weight of what she had done had finally become heavier than the pride keeping it in place. She sat across from her husband in their living room and told him everything, every word. Richard Harrison did not speak for a very long time. When he finally did, his voice was different than Victoria had ever heard it. "You destroyed that boy's career," he said quietly, "over a rejection." Victoria had no answer for that. Richard picked up his phone. Jordan was in his office at Meridian when his assistant told him Richard Harrison was on the line. He sat with that information for a moment. Then he picked up. "Jordan," Richard's voice was rough, the voice of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. "I know what happened. Victoria told me everything." A long pause. "I owe you an apology that I don't have adequate words for." Jordan was quiet. "I believed her," Richard continued, "over you. After everything you showed me, everything you built in this firm, I believed her without giving you a real chance to defend yourself. And I have thought about that every single day since I saw your face on that magazine cover." His voice cracked slightly. "I am sorry, son." The word son hung in the air between them. Jordan looked out the window of his corner office, in his firm, in his city, and thought about a highway in Georgia and a London flight and a studio apartment in February and every single day he had chosen to keep going when stopping would have been so much easier. "Mr. Harrison," he said finally, "I forgave you a long time ago." Silence on the other end. "You did?" Richard said. "I had to," Jordan said simply. "Carrying that would have cost me more than you ever could." A pause. "Bitterness is expensive. I couldn't afford it."
The call from Atlanta came 6 months later. It was Marcus. The Carter Logistics Company was in trouble. Their father, Robert, had suffered a mild stroke. 3 major contracts had fallen through. The company that Robert Carter had built from a single truck and a prayer was hemorrhaging money, and the brothers, proud, stubborn, too afraid to ask for help, had run out of options. Marcus called Jordan as a last resort. His voice on the phone was a complicated thing, equal parts pride and shame and desperation, and the ghost of a highway in October hanging over every word. Jordan listened to everything. When Marcus finished, there was a silence that held years inside it. "Can you help us?" Marcus asked finally. His voice had never sounded like that before. Small, uncertain, human in a way Jordan had never heard from his oldest brother.
Jordan thought about that highway, the van, his jacket, his phone, the faces of 6 brothers watching him disappear into the distance. He thought about what it had cost him. He thought about what holding on to it would cost him still. "Send me the financials," Jordan said. "All of them. I'll look at them this week." Marcus exhaled on the other end of the line, a long, shaking breath. "Jordan, Send me the financials, Marcus," Jordan said again, gently. "We'll talk after I've seen the numbers." He hung up. Then he sat alone in his quiet office for a moment, eyes closed, the city of Chicago humming 40 floors below. He was not the boy on the highway anymore. He was not the man in the studio apartment. He was not the employee they had thrown away or the son they had tried to erase. He was Jordan Carter, and everything they had meant for his destruction had become, brick by patient brick, the foundation of something none of them could have imagined. He opened his laptop. He got to work.
The cover of the Chicago Business Magazine changed everything. Not overnight. Jordan had learned by now that nothing real happens overnight. But steadily, the way a tide comes in, the calls started arriving. Investors, CEOs, board members, people who had read the article 3 times and wanted to understand what exactly was happening at Meridian Industries and whether the man responsible for it could be persuaded to sit across a table from them. Jordan took every meeting, not because he needed them. He had learned to move from a place of abundance rather than desperation, another lesson the hard years had burned permanently into him. He took the meetings because he understood something his younger self had not. Every room is an opportunity to serve somebody. It was in one of these meetings that he encountered the most unexpected face he had seen since arriving in Chicago. Gerald Cole. The same Gerald Cole who had sat in that Harrison Capital conference room 4 years ago and listened to Victoria Harrison's lie with the expression of a man who had already decided what he believed before anyone finished speaking. The same Gerald Cole who had nodded gravely and said, "We have to protect the firm," while Jordan sat across from him and watched his career being dismantled in real time. Gerald walked into the Meridian boardroom for a routine investor introduction and stopped dead when he saw Jordan standing at the head of the table. The room had 12 people in it. Every single one of them felt the shift in atmosphere. Jordan looked at Gerald Cole for exactly 1 second, long enough to register recognition, short enough to deny anything, and then extended his hand with a calm, professional smile. "Mr. Cole," he said, "welcome to Meridian. Can I get you some coffee before we start?" Gerald Cole shook his hand. His grip was uncertain. His eyes were searching Jordan's face for something: anger, resentment, the satisfaction of a man who had the upper hand and intended to use it. He found none of those things, just professionalism, just grace, just a young man who had clearly decided that Gerald Cole did not occupy enough space in his story to deserve a dramatic moment. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Gerald Cole committed to a significant investment in Meridian Industries before he left. Afterward, as people filtered out of the boardroom, Gerald lingered. When the room was empty, he turned to Jordan with an expression that had shed its professional armor entirely. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "What happened at Harrison Capital, I should have investigated more carefully. I should have given you a fair hearing." He paused. "I didn't, and I have thought about that." Jordan straightened the papers in front of him slowly. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I appreciate that." A pause. "Genuinely." He looked up. "But I want you to know something. What happened at Harrison Capital was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because it wasn't painful, it was, but because it put me on a road I never would have found otherwise." He closed his folder. "So I don't need your apology as much as I think you need to give it, and I accept it, freely." Gerald Cole looked at him for a long moment. "How old are you?" he asked. 28, Jordan said. Gerald shook his head slowly. "I am 59 years old," he said, "and I am not sure I have learned what you clearly already know." Jordan smiled. "You just invested in Meridian," he said. "You're learning."
Gerald laughed, surprised, genuine, and walked out. Jordan stood alone in the boardroom. He thought about the young man who had sat in a conference room 4 years ago, listening to a lie, watching the room decide against him before he had finished his first sentence. That young man would not have been able to do what he had just done. That young man would have wanted Gerald Cole to feel smaller, would have needed him to. Jordan Carter did not need that anymore, and the freedom in that, the lightness of it, was better than any revenge he could have engineered. Robert Carter's birthday was in April. He turned 65 that year, a milestone his doctors had not been certain he would reach after the stroke 18 months earlier. He had recovered more fully than anyone expected, because Robert Carter was, at his core, a man who refused to be finished before he was finished. The family gathered in Atlanta, all of them. It was the first time in 4 years that every Carter son was in the same room. Jordan drove down from Chicago alone, arriving late Friday evening as the Atlanta Springs settled warm and fragrant over the neighborhood he had grown up in. The house looked the same, brick front, wide porch, the old oak tree in the yard that he and his brothers had climbed as boys before any of them understood what brothers were supposed to mean. He sat in his car in the driveway for a moment. He was not afraid. He had done his work, the internal work, the hard, invisible kind that nobody sees and nobody applauds. He had sat alone in enough hotel rooms in enough cities processing the wreckage of what his brothers had done until nothing left to process. He was not coming home carrying anything. He was just coming home.
His father was on the porch when he got out of the car. Robert Carter, 64 years old, a little slower, a little thinner, but with eyes that had lost none of their sharpness, stood up from his chair when he saw Jordan walk up the driveway. He came down the porch steps with more urgency than a man with a recovering body should have moved, and pulled his youngest son into his arms with the grip of a man making up for lost time. He held on for a long time. Jordan felt something ancient and aching release in his chest, something he had not known was still there, and he held his father back and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. They stood there in the driveway under the Atlanta sky until Robert finally pulled back and held Jordan's face in both hands the way he had when Jordan was small. "Look at you," Robert said. His voice was rough. "Look at what you became." "You taught me how, Dad," Jordan said. Robert shook his head. "I taught you the foundation. You built the house yourself." His eyes were bright. And what a house it is! Inside, the atmosphere was complicated in the way that family atmospheres always are when history has not been fully resolved. Warm in some corners, tense in others, everyone trying to calibrate how much of the past was safe to reference and how much needed to stay folded away for one more night. The brothers were all there. Marcus, Damon, Terrell, Kevin, Andre, Isaiah. They were men now, older, thicker around the middle, with wives and children orbiting them in the way that life accumulates around people when the years keep moving. They greeted Jordan with handshakes and careful eyes, measuring the temperature of the room, measuring him, trying to understand what version of their youngest brother had walked back into their father's house. Jordan greeted each of them with the same thing, a firm handshake, direct eye contact, and a smile that offered no performance and no pretense, no coldness, no warmth that was too bright to be real, just presence, genuine, uncomplicated presence. It disarmed them more than anger would have. Dinner was Robert's favorite, his wife Margaret's pot roast, sweet potato pie, cornbread, the particular smell of that kitchen that Jordan had carried in some corner of his memory through every hard year in Chicago without even knowing it. They sat around the long table, 9 men, 3 wives, 5 grandchildren weaving between the adults, and Robert Carter looked down the length of his family and bowed his head. He prayed slowly. He thanked God for his health, for his family,
for the grace that had preserved what the enemy had tried to destroy. He did not name names or recount events. He was too wise for that. But when he said, "And Lord, I thank you for bringing my boy home," his voice broke in a way that made every person at that table go very still. When he raised his head, his eyes were wet, and every one of his sons, including Marcus, who had not cried in front of another human being in 15 years, looked at the table. After dinner, the brothers ended up on the back porch the way brothers do, drifting outside with their drinks while the women talked inside and the children ran in the yard. For a while, nobody said anything substantial. Sports, business, the neighborhood, surface conversations stretched over deep water. Then Marcus set down his glass. "Jordan," he said. The porch went quiet. Marcus stared at the yard for a moment. He was a big man, always had been, but sitting there in the April evening, he looked smaller than Jordan had ever seen him, like the years had been doing their own work on him. Like the thing he had done on a highway had been living inside him rent-free for 4 years, and the apartment was showing the damage. "Jordan, I need to say something to you, in front of our brothers, because what I did—" He stopped, jaw tight. "What we did deserved more than a phone call." The other brothers were very still. Jordan looked at his oldest brother. "You don't have to," he began. "Yes, I do," Marcus said, firm, final, the voice of a man who had made a decision and intended to see it through. "I was jealous of you. I had been jealous of you for years, of the way Dad looked at you, of the way things came together for you, of the fact that you were going to be something, and I knew it, and I hated it." And finally, he turned and looked Jordan in the eye. "And instead of dealing with what was in me, I took it out on you. I put my brothers up to something that could have destroyed you, and I have not had a single peaceful night since." He paused. "I am sorry, Jordan. I am deeply, genuinely sorry. And I know that sorry doesn't give you back what we took. I know that. But I needed you to hear it from my mouth, face to face, in front of everyone who was there." The yard was quiet, except for the sound of the children playing. One by one, the other brothers spoke, some more articulately than others, some barely able to find words, but each of them said what needed to be said, in the stumbling, imperfect, deeply human way that real apologies happen when people aren't performing them, but actually meaning them. Jordan listened to all of it. He did not rush them, did not finish their sentences, did not minimize what they were offering by telling them it was fine before they had finished saying it wasn't. He let them speak. He let them carry it to the end and set it down. And then he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at his brothers, these men who shared his blood and his history and the particular irreplaceable texture of a childhood that belonged only to the Carter sons, and he said what was true. "I am not going to sit here and tell you it didn't hurt. It hurt in ways I don't have words for even now." He paused. "But I also cannot sit here and tell you that I am the man I am today without that highway, without Chicago, without every single thing I had to build from nothing because you left me with nothing." He looked around the porch. "You meant it for my destruction, I know that, but it became my construction instead. And I genuinely believe, that the road I was supposed to walk required that I walk it the hard way." He sat back. "So yes, I forgive you, all of you, not because what you did was small, it wasn't, but because we are brothers, and I would rather spend the rest of my life building something with you than burning something because of what's behind us." The porch was very quiet. Marcus pressed his fist to his mouth and looked at the yard. Terrell, the third brother, who had never been emotional a day in his life, had to stand up and walk to the railing and stay there for a moment with his back to everyone. Isaiah, the second youngest, said softly, "Man, how?" Jordan looked at him. "Same way I survived everything else," he said simply, "one day at a time, and never letting what they did become who I am." Robert Carter appeared at the back door. He had heard enough. He stepped onto the porch slowly and looked at his sons, all of them together in the house he had built under the April sky, and he nodded once deeply, the way a man nods when he sees something he has been praying for finally arrived. He pulled up a chair and sat down in the middle of his boys, and for the first time in 4 years, the Carter family was whole.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to SOC Chronicles. Carter Logistics did not just survive, it flourished. With Jordan's restructuring, his connections, and the quiet backing of Meridian Industries, Carter Logistics tripled its contracts within 18 months and expanded into 3 new states. Robert Carter watched from his recovery chair in Atlanta as the company he had built came back to life, resurrected by the son his other sons had thrown away. When Robert called Jordan to thank him, he wept on the phone. Old man tears, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than words. "I should have protected you better," Robert said. "A father should protect his children." "You gave me everything I needed before it happened, Dad. You taught me who to be. That's what carried me through." The brothers came to Chicago together 6 months later. They sat in Jordan's conference room, 6 men who had left their youngest brother on the side of a highway and faced him across a table that represented everything they had tried to prevent him from becoming. Jordan looked at each of them. He did not make them beg. He did not rehearse the speech he could have made. He did not list what they had cost him or perform his forgiveness for maximum effect. He simply said, "You're my brothers. What's done is done. Let's talk about what we're going to build." Marcus, 38 years old, pride and shame written in equal measure across his face, looked at his youngest brother and felt something shift permanently inside his chest. "How are you not angry?" he asked quietly. Jordan considered the question honestly. "I was, for a long time," he said. "But I figured out that the same God who let you put me on that highway was the same God who used that highway to get me exactly where I was supposed to be." He looked around the table. "I can't be angry about the road that led me home." The room was very still. Outside the windows, Chicago blazed and roared and moved, indifferent and magnificent, the way great cities do. Jordan Carter looked at his brothers and saw not the men who had betrayed him, but the men who were sitting in front of him now, older, humbled, present, and he made a choice that cost him nothing and gave him everything. He let it go, completely, finally. And in the letting go, in that clean, costly, extraordinary act of grace, Jordan Carter became something even his enemies could not have taken from him: free. Thank you for staying this long. I hope you are inspired in a way. Don't forget to subscribe and share. What they meant for your destruction, destiny will use for your elevation. Stay faithful in the dark. The morning is already on its way.